we often use this terminology from day to day in identifying ourselves as an introvert or an extrovert. And I want to actually break that down. You know, a lot of great philosophers, as Terry brought up, a lot of great philosophers like to break things down so that they can fully understand something. And sometimes we use communication loosely to label things. The problem and challenge you have when you label something is there's this identity associated with it that is harder to break from. And so many of us identify as an introvert, and certain attributes that go with that may or may not be true about us, but will then end up having a tendency towards those introverted tendencies or extroverted ones because we've been labeled as an extrovert and now have identified as that. And as if you've been listen to some of my prior speeches, I talked about identity and how that drives who you are. The words I am are some of the most powerful statements in English language, or any language, however you want to translate that. And to say I am something immediately is sort of decisive. Decide means to kill off. It kills off other possibilities. So if I say I'm an introvert, whatever attributes are associated with that are then immediately everything else outside of that is then killed off. And so it's nice to have these Keirsey or Myers-Briggs or these sorters of all these different personality types, or even in astrology, you've got these different signs you're born under. The problem is a lot of these identifications aren't absolute. A lot of them, I actually don't think any of them are absolute. I think there's this spectrum of personalities that come about, and so I think it's essential that I elucidate, fun word, thank you, whoever chose that, elucidate what the difference is between introversion and extroversion. So an introvert, by definition, I just pulled it up on dictionary.com, is a reserved or shy person who enjoys spending time alone. I've otherwise heard the definition of someone who gets energized by being by themselves. And I think that secondary definition came about because some people go, no, I like spending time alone, but sometimes I need to get out, right? And then the extroverted definition, according to dictionary.com, was a gregarious and unreserved person. So in other words, someone who speaks a lot and isn't afraid of talking necessarily around other people or in a group. And I think many people have even wanted to redefine that as someone who gets energy in a group, but sometimes they need their alone time. And I think those alternate definitions come around because people actually recognize that they aren't fixed in that definition. They aren't specifically introverted or specifically extroverted. So I identified as an introvert a vast majority of my life, and actually super blessed by Patrick's comment to me one time. He said, I always saw you as an extrovert. And that actually, Patrick, has made a big difference in me actually altering my self-perception and recognizing, no, I don't have to be following this label of an introvert because that's who I've been, because I get to choose who I become, right? Those things that we choose, we drive our behaviors by our identity. And so I'm beginning to break that down and go, okay, well, I can start by calling myself the confident introvert, but ultimately I want to throw that terminology away altogether. Because here's the thing, is your identity as an introvert or an extrovert has come at a young age. Most of you at 5 or 6 years old were identified. Well, guess what happens? In that younger period of life, first of all, more people are just going to have sort of whiplash behaviors. There's going to be less prefrontal cortex processing preventing us from doing certain things. So on the introverted side, they may be overly reserved. They may not talk at all and say, oh, my kid's an introvert. Whereas if we didn't identify them as that, maybe later in life they would be less reserved and we might call them an extrovert. Or there's the extroverts whose prefrontal cortex is not stopping them from saying whatever they think is on their mind at a young age. And so we call them an extrovert, and they end up staying with that, whereas, again, development of a prefrontal cortex prevents them from saying things that aren't good down the line. And so we end up applying these labels and then living them out as adults, which may or may not be the truth of who we are capable of being, but who we've ended up choosing to live into as an introvert or an extrovert. In fact, I believe today technology has led more people to self-identifying as introverts. Why? Because we get on these machines, we have no need for human interaction, we get our entertainment, we get some sort of social, I'd call it very mild social fulfillment through social media. It's not a fulfilling, I don't think, but that's a whole another topic. But we get some level of satisfaction being in front of technology, and that may or may not be true about who we can be, because technology has led us to believe we're more of introverts just because we can live alone more easily. So here's a couple problems with extroversion. Is some extroverts can come off as self-focused versus others-focused because they're talking about themselves. It's all about them or their stories and whatever they're saying. They can cause introverts to feel suppressed because they're constantly owning the conversation. They're ready to respond quickly, whereas an introvert may be thinking about something and not have a moment to interject. I remember growing up when people would have these conversations, I'd have all these thoughts, but I'd never find that moment to interject, whereas people would just sort of right as someone else finished a sentence, someone else would start, and I'm like, I can't do that. Where's the pause for me to speak? And then some extroverts may seem more needy in relationships, more attention, more time. They may lack peace with themselves or fear being alone. Fear being alone. So many of us go, oh, the extrovert. And on the outside, they're more entertaining, they're more connecting, but they could have a great fear of being alone, and that could inhibit them in so many different ways. Now, the benefits of extroversion is that they have less fear with being with others. They're less likely to be alone because they're going to be less inhibited from starting a conversation, from getting in front of a group. They're going to be great at explaining concepts to others because they're going to be less in their mind and more paying attention to the people they're talking to. They're usually going to be great storytellers or good at on-the-spot decision-making. Because sometimes we need to know, whether that be in battle and war, or whether that be a major event happens at work. So now on the other end, there's introversion. So there's some problems with introversion, that you lack relational capacity or have the inability to talk, the fear of actually relating and or calling other people, getting on the phone and talking. Again, something I can relate to is many friendships I developed in my life, I did not even pick up the phone to talk to them. So they tend to lack more of that support system and fear being judged. But they can be more peaceful with themselves, good at listening, good at planning and reflection. And that's where strength comes in, that the planning component, that reflection, that being able to see, are these decisions good long-term decisions? And they're able to sit there and listen. And General Patton even said, fear kills more people than death. So the extrovert has the fear of being alone. The introvert has the fear of being judged. Both have fears, and that stops many of us more than death itself. But what begins to give us the ability to overcome those labels is identifying them as such, so that we can go, I don't want to be that. In prior speeches, I talked about overcoming fear by confronting your fears. I talked about altering your identity. But first, you need to identify, what are you labeling yourself as? And then choose to begin to change that through baby steps of change. That maybe you're not just an introvert or not just an extrovert. Maybe you're a confident introvert, or maybe you're a reflective extrovert. But at some point, you throw that definition that you've had for yourself away.